A very good morning to everybody in the room. It's not too many yet, but I know we're also on streaming, so let's hope that there's many more people watching us here. Fit for 55. I'm not sure how many have heard this before and know what it is. It sounds a bit like an exercise program for middle-aged people. Also, we have 55 minutes for the panel, so I was wondering whether that has anything to do with this. I guess it doesn't. What it is a European Commission plan set last year to set the EU on course to slash greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by the year 2030. And that's a relatively simple count. 2030 is 7.5 years away. So a 55% cut in greenhouse emissions is an enormous challenge, and the European Union has not put this into law yet. That's perhaps important to mention. I trust that is the case. It's only a plan so far. Let me quickly introduce the round. To my left, Stefan Ebner. Stefan Ebner is head of the International and National Interest Policy at the Traffic and Transport section at the WKO, the Wirtschaftskammer Österreich, the Austrian Chamber of Commerce, that is. In charge for association strategy, federal bodies and finances, for transport and environmental policies, which is exactly the topic we have here today, and for transport climate protection strategy in terms of carbon dioxide measures. Marc Billet, welcome all three of you, Senior Advisor for Goods Transport at the IRU, the International Road Transport Union. Now that's not a union in the sense of representing workers. That could be misunderstood to some extent. It is the global, and I underline global, road transport organization representing the interests of bus, coach, taxi and truck operators. To ensure economic growth, prosperity via sustainable mobility of people and goods by road transport. I think in your previous profession you were also an advisor to the European Union on transport policies.
Yes.
Ralf Schweighöfer is the managing director of DHL Express in Austria since 10 years, I believe.
12, actually.
12, I'm sorry. DHL Express is market leader in international express shipping, I think globally, not only in Austria. You are with Deutsche Post DHL since 30 plus years?
35 years.
35 years, and held various management positions there. We are missing one participant. We were just informed that he can't come in because he is ill. There would have been Victor Lippai from Maersk Logistics Solutions. It's too bad because I would have liked the mix to have the world's largest air cargo carrier here with DHL and the world's largest maritime carrier with Maersk. Unfortunately, Maersk is not here, so we will run the round without them. And we'll also have an interesting discussion, I'm sure. Let me just quickly introduce this Fit for 55 thing. In working through it and reading into the subject, there is so much on the web that it is impossible to read it all. It is a humongous paper tiger and plan so far. But there is no way around doing something about the environment. We cannot go on the way we did. We have to do something about it as we realize that climate change is not an invention of some environmentalists, but is in fact reality which we have to deal with. Drastic changes are in store for the European Union's businesses and people. Cutting emissions so steeply and quickly as part of an effort to hit net zero emissions by 2050. So Fit for 55 is, so to say, a step in between, which is difficult to believe when you read this whole thing. Net zero emissions by 2050 is going to require a dramatic revamp of how people drive, of how we insulate our homes, how we produce things like steel and cement, and how forests and lands are managed. Just to give you a bit of an idea, in 2019, the EU member states blew 3,875 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents into the air. That's 3.8 billion, or Milliarden in Deutsch, tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And the transportation sector accounts for approximately 1/4 of that. So to give you a picture of the size of what we're talking about. I want to start with you, Ralph, as a representative of the world's largest air carrier, to let us know what is DHL's plan to move forward with the Fit for 55 program.
Yeah, I think what is important and what I see in just many discussions is that when I talk to colleagues, when I talk to people from inside the industry, I hear probably for 30, 40 minutes why all this is not going to happen, why this is far too expensive, far too complicated. And so usually we all think about why it's not happening, why it's not possible to do. And I think that is a mindset we definitely need to change. And if we haven't changed it yet, we need to change it now. There's a very simple reason why I think we all need to reconsider what we've done and why we've done it. Because it's not about me or us, because 10, 15 years we will probably retire, but we want to get young talents. And I've just recently said the war for talents is over, and we have lost it. So the young people are able to choose where they want to work. When you talk to 20-odd-year-old young people, they don't want to work for an industry which is polluting the earth. So if we want to be attractive as employers for young talents, we need to change. I think that is the extremely simple fact I come along every time. So that is important to understand. But now, what's the answer? I think we have to do all the efforts which are possible to really change our emissions, and there's not a silver bullet for that. So I think within Deutsche Post DHL, we have identified 3 main drivers, and simply you could say that is 30, 60, 90. So 30% by 2030, we want to have 30% of fuels from SAF, sustainable fuels. By 2030, we want to have 60% of the first mile and last mile carbon neutral. So most likely, with the recent available technology, it will be electrified. And the third number, 90, is that by 2030, we want to have 90% of electricity for our facilities carbon neutral. And I think those are the 3 elements we are looking into it. When I take, for example, the sustainable fuels, we have just announced that we have signed a contract for the purchase of more than 800 million liters of sustainable fuels made by waste oil. That is already a significant contribution. However, that won't be enough, but that is probably more than is available right now on the market. So this contract lasts for the next 5 years. When I look at the decarbonization of the last and first mile, we see it is a challenge right now. However, our colleagues in Amsterdam already have 60% in Amsterdam today. So we see it is possible, not with the full coverage and not as efficient, but right now we are in close discussions and negotiations with BMK, Ministry of Infrastructure and Climate Protection in Austria, to enable using fully electrical delivery cars, to have a counterpart, the equivalent of a 3.5-ton delivery van. You actually need a payload of 4.25 tons. And the driving license regulations have been changed. So with a B class, with an extra 5 hours, you're allowed to do that, to drive such a 4.25 van. However, when we look at the trade regulations and other topics, it's not really as easy. That is something we are quite optimistic in. Within the next 6 months, we will achieve together with the government that these kind of delivery vans can be used. And
may I interrupt you here?
Yes.
Because what you're saying connects directly to Mark and the representation of the IRU at the European Commission in terms of road transport. The licensing of drivers, I guess, is one of your sections that you're looking at, Mark, but obviously it's a much bigger thing. Can you give us an insight into what the IRU is doing to to become fit for 55?
Well, as you say, Robert, this is a very ambitious and a huge package. In fact, it's almost impossible to deal with every single detail of the entire package. So at IRU, we have concentrated our efforts on issues relating to alternative fuels infrastructure, to the inclusion of road transport in the emission trading system, and in the revision of the energy taxation framework. Now, we all know that we have to do additional efforts to decarbonize. And there is definitely a commitment from the side of the industry to actually do that. And you heard Ralph, and that's a general commitment. However, the transport operators are just not prepared to do it at any cost. All right? So what we are trying to do here is we're trying to see a constructive approach to the Fit for 55. And seeing a constructive approach is not without challenge. Now, we need to try to see the Fit for 55 as a positive, a constructive incentive for the industry to actually invest in decarbonization. Now, in order to do that, of course, we need vehicles. Now, nobody is going to buy vehicles if we don't have alternative fuel infrastructure. So let's say this whole proposal on alternative fuel infrastructure is the core of everything. Now, we have to make sure that not only the private car users get that infrastructure, but also the commercial vehicle industry gets that infrastructure. And the commercial vehicle is not a private car, all right? Now, what we also need is we need that infrastructure fast. And we do not only need it for electromobility. Electromobility is fantastically important, but we need a much wider range. We need hydrogen solutions, we need e-fuels, we need carbon neutral fuels. If we want, in a relatively short period of time, to already start making progress on better decarbonization, we need to have solutions available that actually are combinable with the internal combustion engine. Because we know that the vast majority of our vehicles today actually still run on an internal combustion engine. Now, if you can start using fuels that are carbon neutral and start using them in combination with an internal combustion engine, you can already, in a relatively short period of time, start making progress. Now, we have to, of course, consider that if there is no strong commitment from the European Parliament and from the Member States on realizing this alternative fuel infrastructure, that the entire package could end up being a cash cow for our industry, and that our industry will be paying a lot of money in terms of charges, taxes, and duties without actually seeing very concrete, additional, further results, positive results in decarbonization. Okay? Now, we have to make sure that, okay, when we look at the ETS and the energy taxation, what we are proposing is that we actually see the application of those over a period of time. And we would like to see them linked to the accessibility to alternative fuel vehicles. So the faster alternative fuel vehicles actually come on the market, the faster one could actually implement them. If there is a slowdown, then the ETS and the ETD should also be implemented slower. Now, what is also important is that...
Just for everyone to understand, ETS is the...
Emission trading
system,
yes.
And the ETD is the...
energy taxation revision.
Thank you.
So, what is important here also is that when you look at these two proposals, that there is no discrimination in road users. In the Parliament, for example, there are parliamentarians who would like to exclude the private user and put the entire burden on the industry. That is something that is for us absolutely unacceptable. Now, if we're going for an inclusion of the road transport industry in the emission trading system, that should mean that all equivalent parallel CO2 taxation should be phased out. So national emission trading systems should disappear. Other CO2-related taxation should also disappear. Now, what is finally extremely important also is that the revenues of emission trading, and potentially also from energy taxation, should be actually reinvested in solutions to help road transport decarbonize. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we're in Austria, and Austria is extremely keen on forcing modal shift away from road to rail. But, ladies and gentlemen, not everything can be carried by rail. We need a freight transport and logistics chain which in its entirety is clean, sustainable, and decarbonized. Road transport will always be a very important player in that logistics chain and should be helped to decarbonize. So forcing a modal shift is not a solution to decarbonization.
But perhaps it is important to make clear that if the cost of transportation rises beyond control, that means that everyone in society is going to feel that impact.
Absolutely.
Because trucking companies, air carriers, maritime carriers, don't do all this transportation as a self-purpose. They're actually moving stuff which we're all buying in shelves and which we need and require to live. So whilst Ralph mentioned that the transportation industry is considered to be sort of a dirty industry in emitting a lot of CO2 emissions, at the same time, They don't do it for themselves, they actually do it for all of us. Stefan, how is the WKO involved in setting policies that would allow Austria to get, and the Austrian industry that you sort of lobby for, to get ready for Fit for 55?
Yes, thank you. It's clear we can't abolish good transport until 2050. Good transport will still exist, and freight transport creates welfare, and welfare is created by freight transport. They are tied and inherent. And we also will see that the truck also in 2050 will be the backbone of the good transport in Austria and in Europe. And having this view, we support the freedom of choice when choosing means of transport. So different mobility needs need different technologies and different categories of vehicle. So we support the technology mix concerning cars, trucks, and buses until 2050. Goods transport in the urban areas, in the inner city area, the distribution traffic is carried out with small vans. In this field, electromobility is a future option, clearly, but also hybrid vehicles, and during a transitional period, the use of natural gas can be an option in this field, in the field of light commercial vehicles. But we all here know the conventional diesel combustion engine currently remains unbeaten, especially on the long distance. And how to deal with this topic, yeah? And so we focus in the Austrian Economic Chamber also on e-fuels. The ambitious climate targets require technological innovations and openness to technology in order to achieve the targets in 30 years. And e-fuels are climate neutral fuels with the same technical characteristics as diesel or kerosene, which are made from oil. And e-fuels can be used for the current fleet vehicle. And they can also be used in the existing filling station network. So there could be extension of using liquid fuels, and they are, for us, a very important alternative to conventional liquid fuels, and they are therefore ideally suited for decisively and affordable reducing carbon dioxide emissions in transport, also in the heating market and so on. Yeah? And e-fuels could be produced in regions where it's sunny, where it's windy, where could use solar energy and wind energy, and they can be easily manageable brought to Europe. Hydrogen would be an intermediate product.
Thank you very much. Ralph, you mentioned a little earlier, you were talking about sustainable fuels. And if I didn't mishear, you talked about old oil. Now, old oil in an average brain is not necessarily a clean term. Can you elaborate a bit on that, what that means?
Yeah, I think that is all the... I don't think that the future, as we heard now a lot, is really in sustainable fuels. I believe sustainable fuel is something to overcome the dilemma that we still need to have high weights to carry, that we have to enable global trade. We also need aircraft, and we don't have really at the moment, and probably for the next 20 years, a good alternative to carry heavy weights without aircraft. So the point is, if we need those aircraft, we should have kerosene which is as sustainable as possible, but still it isn't 100% sustainable. So it has, if you compare it to new kerosene, it has 20% of the CO2 emissions of, so the sustainable fuel has 20% of the CO2 emissions compared to classic kerosene, but it still has. So I think on the long term, we also need to get away with it. From that, we now purchase 12 fully electric flights, aircraft. We hope that we will be able to use them in 2024.
Fully electric aircraft.
Fully electric aircraft. However, this aircraft will be able to carry 1,000 kilos.
Okay.
So a 757 today carries 27 kilos. So we believe, still believe we need to invest in the future and we need to support this. And so that is our first step in electrification of aircraft. But I don't think that really with sustainable fuels, we will be able on the long term to achieve our targets. And therefore, I'm pretty skeptical about this discussion about whether sustainable fuels isn't good enough also for the diesel motor for the next 10 to 20 years. I doubt that we will be able to achieve the targets we need to achieve and to reduce the global warming.
Thank you. Mark, you are somewhat close to policy making at the European Commission. Why would a plan like Fit for 55 be worked out with extremely ambitious goals on one side, but at the same time sort of difficult to achieve on the other side? It reminds me a bit of management that would set goals for the employees, for bonus agreements that can never be achieved. Isn't that, in a way, sort of neglecting reality?
Well, when you look at European Union decision-making, the soup is never eaten as hot as it is served. So one aims high to land in the middle. So we had some very high ambitions, potentially for some not even high enough in the proposal texts, but then when you look at the discussions in the European Parliament and between the ministers of the member states, you see that already difficult choices are being made. Just to give you an example, in the discussions on emission trading system and on including road transport in emission trading, the Environment Committee of the European Parliament is the lead committee there, but the Transport Committee, who is giving an opinion to the Environment Committee, has already voted for a complete exclusion of road transport in the emission trading system. So there you already see what is happening. When you look at the alternative fuel infrastructure, you already see that the members of the European Parliament are trying to water down the ambitions of the European Commission in putting in place the infrastructure on fuels like hydrogen. And also the ministers are thinking about delaying the implementation of the alternative fuel network for hydrogen, for example, for commercial vehicles. So you see, it's all about the money. And there is a huge investment cost involved. And, okay, that is a very important aspect for member states to consider. Now, for the industry, it is important that we actually get something out of this whole discussion and that we do not end up paying higher costs and that we have a very negative impact, a very negative operational impact. And just to pick up on what Ralph said, a commercial vehicle is a working tool, okay? And it's all about load capacity, okay? And we need to try and move towards a situation where we can actually carry more with less. And when looking at road transport, that means allowing higher capacity vehicles, more higher capacity vehicles to be used in road transport than are allowed today. And one of the very big challenges of electromobility is the weight of the batteries, and that is the challenge today, and hopefully that solutions can be found for that in the future. But the challenges of that battery weight will take away load capacity, and we may end up in a downscaling situation rather than in an upscaling situation, and is that where we want to go?
Well, obviously not. There were ambitions for decades, and I've been in this industry for 45 years, to also combat the emissions topic by moving slower. I know that in the maritime business, slow steaming had become a big thing, and indeed reducing speed by 40–50% in fact reduces emissions by 30%, which is a big topic. Is there any chance to look at this in air traffic? Ralph, is that, I mean, can we fly slower without falling down?
Actually, we can do a lot, and we tried a lot of things during the pandemic, because what happened during the pandemic, our aircrafts were some of the very few aircrafts in the heaven anyway, in the sky, and so we aligned with a lot of traffic control institutions to test different routes. So we realized by using different roads, by using different heights for the flights, we could save up to 30% of the fuel. And that is what we did, and that is what we maintained even now when more and more commercial flights are getting back. But I'd like to come back for a moment, if you allow, Robert, to a point that I tried to make in the beginning. Because everything that we're saying, how difficult it is, I fully understand. But it won't resolve one future problem. So how many people in this room are hiring people? Hiring new people? Okay. So of those of you who are hiring people, how many have had problems recently in the last 6 months to find proper people? Okay, so almost everyone. And
well, I want you to finish this topic. The one thing I want to say, because we had a podium discussion yesterday on the topic, and there's always talk about young talents. Mm-hmm. I wonder what we do with all these untalented people. They also need to work at some point. I'm not sure if HR departments ever looked at this, but sorry.
I think it's a fair point, and okay. Of course we need to train people, and I'm not sure if there are untalented people actually. I think you need to find the right position for people. But anyway, apart from that, if we want to attract new people, we also need to change our thinking. So we shouldn't think on the deficits. Why is it not happening? What are the obstacles? Why are we not going for sustainable fuels? Why is the industry not providing better cars? But to change the view, to see that we want to drive it. We want to be the driver of it. We want to tell the automotive industries we need these kinds of cars. We want to talk and tell the government we need this infrastructure. And by the way, we also start with ourselves. So we installed a solar power roof on our 20 years old facilities. We implemented wall boxes to have the loading, the charging infrastructure, and we're deploying this concept now for all our facilities in Austria. So yes, we are requesting a lot from the government. We are requesting a lot and pushing really the automotive industry, but we want to drive it. And I think that is important.
I want to definitely give in on the untalented people, and I want to apologize for that, but we have less qualified people, and we still need to bring them into the process. Mark, you wanted to add something to what Ralph was saying here.
Yes, thinking about these young talents, there is an enormous competition in the economy for young talents. Now, one of the major challenges that we have to deal with is the driver's age.
And I was going to ask you about it, Stefan, because you must also...
When you actually have to tell a young person who is extremely motivated to become a professional driver at 17, and you start training that person, and you invest in that person to actually get his certificate of professional competence, but you have to tell him, you can only start driving that truck at 18, so I'm going to employ you for 1 year in our accounting department. That is not very encouraging for that person who is motivated to become a driver straight away.
Yes.
So we have to think about how can we, in a very safe way, because we need to think about road safety as well, how can we start employing people at 17 as professional drivers in a very safe framework.
Yeah. Understood. Stefan, can you look at this from the Austrian perspective?
Yeah, as we know, during the pandemic there were weeks of closure, no taxis were on the road, and after this closure, because of the pandemic and the first opening, hundreds of taxi drivers were away. They chose other jobs, so they were gone, And in the professional area of the truck drivers, every year we have 3,000 new truck drivers who want to gain the code 797. And after 2 years of pandemic, we lost 500 of them. We will never get them back. 500 is of 3,000 of 1 year, so it's very much. And the lack of bus drivers is much more intensive. In 21 we had a reduction, but also we already had in 2020 already a reduction compared to 29. So in the field of the truck drivers we had a recovering, but a gap we can't close. But in the sector of bus drivers, professional bus drivers, we had 2 years in consequence with reductions.
I think it also relates to the topic of further automation, which eventually will impact the emissions topic also. But I know that, for instance, the Austrian railways have an enormous shortage of locomotive operators. So it's the truck drivers on one side, but also locomotive operators are missing throughout Europe. And perhaps one of the reasons for that is that we hear so much about the fact that trucks will drive on their own in the future, and trains will do so as well, and airplanes will fly without pilots and all this. Not everybody wants to become a leader or a manager, but people want to have the assurance that they still have a job in what they have learned in 10 or 15 or 20 years. And perhaps there's an element of insecurity there for young people. And we saw in the UK
I don't think so.
recently what can happen if we simply don't have enough truck drivers on the road.
I don't think that's the root cause why we don't get truck drivers at the moment. I think one of the root causes is that the working conditions are just not good. And right now, in the recent month, people had plenty of opportunities. And we are not alone in this situation, by the way. Look at the restaurants. Everyone, how many waiters left that industry. But I think we have to work on those working conditions.
No, I fully agree. Your argument, though, that young people want to work for a clean industry, the railways would be considered a clean industry, and they have a similar problem, though.
Yeah. So, and it's not black and white, obviously, but also, let's say, not as great educated person who you said untalented, but let's say just a person who just wants to do a job and gets paid for feels much better when it's an environment where he or she receives and thinks it contributes and it has a purpose. So we are seeing kind of, especially with our working conditions, we are provided. So I'm not saying we are not part of this. So I think the whole industry created this and more pressure, and I think we need to think differently. So for sure we need truck drivers for the next 20 years. So how can we create working conditions which are attractive for these people?
There is another podium discussion, I think, later today on women in logistics and transportation. And perhaps we should, and that's not our topic, that's a topic for the afternoon, but perhaps we should also look at how can we attract more women to drive trucks and to become locomotive operators and to get involved in the transportation and logistics business, which for decades has been a men's business.
So we're 40%.
40, you're at 40%?
Yeah.
That's not bad.
In the entire workforce and also in the management.
That's exceptional, I believe, in our industry. Stefan, you mentioned, and also Mark was talking about it, the hydrogen technology at some point to be a solution. I'm not a technician, I don't know if anyone is in the room. How realistic is that, and do you have any contacts to the industry that is actually working on making it reality?
Yeah, there exist several initiatives at national level or at European level to enforce hydrogen, to enforce e-fuels. Yeah, but the most important task is the lobbying. Yeah, because our ministry BMK is also focused on electricity, also on electricity for the long distance haulier. Yeah? And if you read the proposals of the commissions, they are not aware that e-fuels existing, maybe in the aviation sector, but these topics are not reflected in the politician maker. Yeah?
Plus, we will have to produce the electricity somehow if we move with it. And we may again have to go back to gas and perhaps even nuclear energy.
Yes, okay, that's probably a conflict for the Green parties European-wide. Because they want improve the level of renewable energy in Europe. Okay, concerning the railways in Austria, we have nearly 100% renewable energy concerning electricity, but you need plants where electricity is produced in a renewable way. Yeah, but also in this field we are open for a technological mix. Yeah, the grid, the systems must function. Yeah, and there should be a wide possibility for energy suppliers to produce the
We covered a lot of topics that would include the taxation system, which is one in itself that I don't know if there can be an easy agreement soon. I also read about effort sharing regulation. Mark, can you say something about what that is?
Well, the effort sharing regulation is actually a regulation about who will pay what and who will actually take what piece of the burden to actually make it happen. And that is not only between member states, what the member states are supposed to do in terms of objectives to make it all happen, but it is also looking at what the industry, the different industrial sectors and the different parts of society should contribute. And of course, that effort sharing regulation goes in parallel with the emission trading system, and sectors that are included in the emission trading are less represented in the effort sharing because, in fact, the fact that they are included in that emission trading actually lays down already what is expected of them to actually achieve in terms of decarbonization.
Thank you for that. Another term was the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Does that affect the transportation industry in any way?
Well, that is, in the first place, targeting industry.
Okay.
Because there is a fear that production may move to countries just outside the European Union.
Right.
Because the emission taxation and charges will be lower there. So in fact, those people who then bring in the goods, who ship the goods back to the European Union, will have to pay extra charges on those goods when entering the Union. But that is not targeted at the transport sector. So the transport operators will not be paying. It will be the shippers that will be paying, but of course, if then the emission trading charges are not paid by the shippers, the trucks will be blocked at the border.
We will all pay it at the end of the day. We have 7.5 minutes left. Are there any questions to one of our participants at the podium that would relate to becoming fit for 55? Any interest from the audience to go further? If not, and you can still jump in at any given point, I want to do a final round. And in closing the topic, I understand from Mark that one key element, especially on the road sector, is the infrastructure. So it burns down to these two things, infrastructure and cash and money. I don't see a lot of infrastructural activity in Austria. And I don't know if there's a lot more going on in other European countries. 2030 is 7.5 years away. We should be building electricity stations all over the place to be ready in a few years. We should see this out on the roads. I don't see it. How realistic is that we get the infrastructure?
Well, from my perspective, we will have to fight very hard to get it, but somebody will have to pay for it. And it is unbelievably important to consider the current tax burden that is put on the road goods transport industry. And we have to think about making sure that the revenues from that tax burden actually flow back to the road transport industry
to actually help carry that burden of, amongst other, the deployment of that alternative fuel infrastructure. Now, on the alternative fuel infrastructure, what is extremely important, and you just mentioned it, the initiatives are not equal in the 27 member states. And some are going faster than others, and some are having other objectives than others. Some are going for electrification, others are going for gas, others are going for carbon neutral fuels, others are going for biofuels. Now, if we want to ensure that we have a good network of international and national transports in the European Union involving road, then everybody will have to move in the same direction, meaning the 27 member states will have to move in the same direction, because otherwise it will be practically impossible to operate international transports with certain technologies of alternative fuel.
Well, you know as much as everyone else in the room that that's not a stronghold of the European Union, that all 27 member states move in the same direction, on any topic for that matter.
But it will be extremely important to make that. It's the same with road infrastructure, it's the same with rail infrastructure. Yeah. If everybody does not go in the same direction, make sure that everything is interconnected, it won't work.
Even in the rail infrastructure, each country runs its own thing and does not want to integrate into a European system. Stefan, you must have experiences with that.
Yeah, also we must fix our mind about which infrastructure we discuss. Concerning the infrastructure, the motorways, in Austria we see the tariffs are quite high, and the revenue for the manager of the motorways, the revenues are quite good, so they can give dividends to the state, they can give taxes to the state, and on the other side there are bans on these roads, so we don't use really this infrastructure fully, so we have a kind of detours on lower ranked roads. And also the other topic is the infrastructure for the railways, How do we use it? Very often railway and road transport compete in the same direction, so they have used nearly all the capacities. How to extend, how to replace capacities each other. For example, in Austria, we create nearly every week a new night transport destination for passenger transport to an international city from Vienna. But this is not useful for the good transport on rail. So what is the prioritization? Is it passenger transport? Then okay, you must accept there's maybe not in the full extent possible to shift good transport to the rail, if you extend passenger transport by night trains through Europe, and you are the great initiator.
I've been hearing political initiatives, and we only have 2 minutes left, for decades of bringing freight onto the river in Austria, of changing or moving freight from road to rail. And I know that the industry really tried hard to support those political intentions, but at the end of the day, when you realize that the rail capacity does not nearly support a strong move from road to rail, it's not much more than just a political intention, as I said a little earlier, with no chance for realization. I think the drivers at the end of the day will have to be companies like DHL, like Maersk, whom we unfortunately don't have here, who have an interest to be seen in society as moving things as clean as possible, who have an interest of being able to acquire young people for running our business at the end of the day, whether or not Fit for 55 will become reality, I don't really dare to make a judgment on this. But I would hope that the big companies will eventually support that as a result of society pressuring it. And Ralph.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I think the simple question is, do we want to be the problem and remain being the problem, or do we want to drive it and be part of the solution? And that is what it's about. Are we pushing it? Are we driving it? Are we investing? And we are investing, Deutsche Post DHL, 7 billion euros over the next 7 years in sustainable technology, and I think that is a clear commitment. And in 2019, we invested already in a 80% climate neutral facility in Linz-Hörsching, and so I think we can't be zero emission tomorrow, but we need the clear commitment from the industry. And I think everyone in the industry who is not driving it, who is not committing it, will probably
be out of the industry at some point.
Exactly.
We need to finalize it. Mark, please.
Yeah, but I agree. We need to decarbonize. We need to do more. But I do not agree that we are the problem. It's not because people...
No, that's not what Ralph said.
Yeah. But it's not because politicians and environmentalists tell us that we are the problem, that we are in fact the problem. No, we are also the solution, as Stefan said.
Of course. And if there's no trucks on the roads anymore, society wouldn't work. And if transport is not around anymore. Thank you, all three of you, to being very active participants in the podium. Thank you for listening to what we had to say. And let's go for another good day at the World of Freight today. Thank you.
Thank you.